Hello, lovely people. It's certainly been a little bit since I did a long-form video. It's actually been quite a long time. I don't know how many of you even remember that I used to do long-form videos, but I did, so yeah. Some stories deserve more than the minute that I'm able to dedicate to them in a YouTube short. And one of those stories would be the story of Robert Todd Lincoln, who might be one of the most interesting figures in American history. So I know you're familiar with who Abraham Lincoln is. Probably the most famous American president of all time, president during the Civil War, assassinated in 1865, you know. His oldest son was Robert Todd Lincoln, born in August of 1843. So Robert did not grow up with his father present, and that's one thing that Abraham Lincoln actually regretted quite a lot. Abraham Lincoln was busy being one of the most influential and best politicians in American history, so that didn't leave a lot of time for him to be home with his family. And his letters to his wife reflect this, as he asked his wife to make sure the kids didn't forget him. Robert Lincoln would back this up, confirming that, yeah, he didn't see his father that much at all. Now, that does not mean that he was deaf to the cause of the Union Army. In fact, quite the opposite. Robert did really want to enlist in the war. His mother had already lost some sons, though, so she was not open to the idea of possibly losing another one. Abraham Lincoln did want Robert to enlist, because he thought, hey, why is my son different than the other sons who have already gone out to war? Eventually, in 1865, which was the year the war ended, Robert was able to enlist, but only after his mother put in a letter to have him put on General Grant's staff, which is obviously something the First Lady can do, I guess. I've never heard of anything like that before, but sure. It was through his position on General Grant's staff that he became one of the last surviving witnesses to see Lee's surrender at the Appomattox Courthouse, which is a feat in itself. What if I told you he did a lot more than that? But before we really get into what he's known for, I want to do a little bit of a transitionary tale first. So we all know who John Wilkes Booth is. That was President Lincoln's assassin. John had a brother, and his name was Edwin Booth. Now, Robert Lincoln had an accident on a train platform that almost killed him, but his life was spared because Edwin Booth saved him. Edwin had no idea that he had just saved the president's son. In fact, he wouldn't know until sources say the day that Lincoln was assassinated, which is just like, yeah, what? That's really something. I don't know if that's true or not, but it supposedly is. So, do with that what you will. It's very cool. But now it's time to get into what Robert Todd Lincoln is really remembered for. Being present at 3 presidential assassinations. I know, what a way to be remembered, right? The first one was the assassination of his father, Abraham Lincoln, which thankfully he was not there to witness the actual event of the shooting. He'd been asked to go to Ford's Theater with his parents, but he declined after a long wagon ride he had just recently had that left him very, very tired. He was in Washington, D.C. when this happened, and he got to be at his father's deathbed, which is right across the street from Ford's Theater. 2 buildings, which I'm proud to say I've actually seen. He would become Secretary of War in 1881 to James A. Garfield, the only president he was the direct eyewitness of an assassination of. Which, once again, is quite, yeah. And finally, he was in the area when William McKinley was shot. That's 3 out of the 4 presidential assassinations in American history that he was in the vicinity of. And if he had lived past 1926, he probably would have been by JFK too. Maybe his ghost was, I don't know. He recognized these patterns and actually declined a future invite from another president because he didn't want him to be assassinated as well. Moving on to his political career, where one of his most prominent events was dispatching troops in the Cincinnati riots of 1884. He also served as the U.S. Minister to Great Britain. Unfortunately, during this time, one of his sons died while he was overseas in Europe. He stopped serving as the Minister to Great Britain in 1893, where he went back to a private life as a lawyer. While it was basically the end for his political career, the rest of the American public didn't want that to be the case, and he was offered the nomination for president multiple times. But he turned down the nomination because he just didn't want to. In fact, he repeatedly said, no, I would never run for president. Nearing the end of his life, one of his last public appearances was at the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial, which was in 1922. This is 4 years before he would die in his sleep at the age of 82, after living a very full and relatively long life. But there's a little bit of this story that goes beyond his death. And no, I'm not talking about the possibility of his ghost being present at JFK's assassination, although that might be an interesting topic for another day. I'm just kidding, I'm not going to do a video on that. In any case, Robert Todd Lincoln wanted to be buried with the rest of his family at the Lincoln tomb. However, his wife didn't like this very much. She thought he deserved to be buried in a special place of honor as to distinguish himself from his father, so that his legacy would become more than just that of his father's son. Thus, she had him buried at Arlington, which is a place that I've actually been to. So, you know, pretty cool. I will tell you, I've had a lot of fun doing this long-form video, and I would like to do more in the future. So, let me know of any more stories that could use a longer form of video than the usual short I do. Please like, subscribe, and share. You have no idea how much this helps out growing creators like me. And remember, another day, another story.